Linda wiped her eyes with the tissues Daniel had given her and tried to steady her voice. She told him about Katie, who was 14 years old and trying so hard to be the mother her siblings needed. Katie had stopped going to school activities and stopped seeing her friends because she came home every day to help with the younger children. Then there was Marcus, who was 11, and had started getting into fights at school because other kids made fun of his worn-out clothes. The twins Sophie and Jake were 8 years old, and they used to be so loud and happy, but lately they had become quiet and withdrawn. And little Ethan was only 3, and he did not understand why there was never enough food, or why they had to leave their old apartment. Daniel listened without interrupting, and his eyes never left her face. When she finished telling him about each child, he nodded slowly and seemed to be thinking about something. Linda expected him to tell her to leave or to say he would give her some money just to get her out of his house. Instead, he stood up and walked to the fireplace mantel and picked up one of the photographs. He looked at it for a long moment and then brought it over to show her. The photograph showed him and a beautiful woman on their wedding day, and they both looked so young and happy. He told her the woman in the photograph was his wife Claire and that she had been a teacher for 30 years. Claire had loved children more than anything in the world, but they had never been able to have any of their own. They had tried for years and gone through treatments and procedures that did not work. Eventually, they accepted that it would just be the two of them, and they made peace with it. But Claire never stopped loving children, and she spent her whole career teaching and mentoring and being there for kids who needed extra support. When she got sick with cancer 2 years ago, one of the last things she made Daniel promise was that he would find a way to honor her memory by helping young people who needed it. Daniel sat back down and looked at Linda with an expression she could not quite read. He said he had been trying to figure out how to keep that promise and that he had donated money to schools and scholarships, but it never felt like enough. It never felt personal the way Claire would have wanted. Then he said something that made Linda think she must have misheard him. He said he wanted to make her an offer and that it might sound strange, but he needed her to listen to the whole thing before she said anything. He explained that he owned 2 houses on this street, the one they were sitting in and the house right next door. The house next door had been a rental property for years, but the tenants had just moved out last month. It was a 4-bedroom house with a backyard, and it was sitting empty. Daniel said he had more money than he would ever need because he and Claire had lived simply and saved carefully. His pension and savings were more than enough for one person, and he had no family to leave anything to. He paused and looked directly at Linda and said he wanted her and her children to live in the house next door. Linda stared at him and could not process what he was saying. She asked if he meant for them to rent it, but she did not have money for rent. Daniel shook his head and said no rent. He said they could live there for free while she got back on her feet. He said he knew it sounded too good to be true, and he understood if she was suspicious. But he wanted her to understand that this would help him just as much as it would help her. He had been so lonely since Claire died, and the house felt like a tomb. He missed having purpose and being around people and having someone to care about. But there was one condition he wanted to make clear. He said he wanted to be part of her children's lives, not as a replacement for their father, but as a grandfather figure, someone who could help with homework and attend school events and be there when they needed an adult. He said he missed having young people around, and he thought maybe they could all help each other. Linda could have a safe place for her family and time to find better work and get stable. The children could have a real home and someone who cared about them. And Daniel could have the family he and Claire had always wanted. Linda felt like she must be dreaming or losing her mind. Things like this did not happen in real life. Strangers did not just offer to house your entire family out of kindness. There had to be something wrong with him or some hidden condition she was not seeing. She asked him directly why he would do this for people he did not even know. Daniel smiled sadly and said it was exactly because they were strangers that he could do it. He said his friends and the people from his church had been trying to take care of him for 2 years, but he did not need taking care of. What he needed was to take care of someone else. He needed to feel useful again. Linda asked what would happen if it did not work out or if they did not get along. Daniel said they would agree to a trial period of 3 months. If at any point she felt uncomfortable or wanted to leave, she could do so with no hard feelings. He would even help her find another place if needed. But he hoped she would give it a chance because he genuinely believed they could help each other. He said he had been praying for a way to honor Claire's memory, and then Linda had shown up at his door. Maybe it was meant to be. Linda thought about Katie trying to take care of 4 younger siblings. She thought about Marcus stealing food from the school cafeteria because he was too ashamed to admit they were hungry at home. She thought about the twins who used to laugh all the time but now barely spoke. She thought about Ethan crying in her arms because his little stomach hurt from emptiness. She thought about the eviction notice and the bills and the hopelessness that had driven her to this man's door with a knife in her pocket. Then she looked at Daniel's sincere face and the photograph of his wife, and she made a decision that went against every instinct that told her to protect herself. She said yes. She said she would try it for 3 months and see how it went. Daniel smiled, and it was the first real smile she had seen from him. He stood up and shook her hand like they were making a business deal. Then he drove her back to her apartment, and when he saw where she was living, his expression became even more determined. The apartment was tiny and freezing and falling apart. Her 5 children were huddled together under blankets on a mattress on the floor. Daniel met each of them and shook their hands seriously like they were adults. Katie looked at him with deep suspicion. Marcus seemed confused. The twins whispered to each other. Ethan hid behind Linda's legs. Daniel told them all that he was looking forward to being their neighbor. Linda Morrison stood outside the small house on Maple Street, and her hands would not stop shaking. The old kitchen knife felt heavy in her coat pocket, and every few seconds she thought about turning around and walking away. But then she remembered her children sitting in that cold apartment with nothing to eat, and she knew she had to do this. 5 children were waiting for her at home, and the youngest one was only 3 years old. Little Ethan had been crying all morning because his stomach hurt from hunger, and Linda had nothing left to give him. She had already given everything she could. The eviction notice was still taped to their apartment door, and the landlord had stopped accepting her promises. Linda worked at the grocery store, but the hours were never enough, and the pay was barely enough to buy food for 2 days. She had tried every food bank in the city, and stood in line at every charity organization and filled out forms at every government office. Nothing worked, and nothing was enough. The bills kept piling up on her kitchen table, and every night she lay awake doing math in her head that never added up to anything good. Her husband, Greg, had died 18 months ago in a construction accident, and the small insurance money was gone within 3 months. She had not known about all the debts he had kept hidden from her. Linda had been watching this house for 3 days now. She knew the man who lived here was named Daniel Grant, and that he was a widower who kept to himself. The neighbors talked about him sometimes when she walked past their yards. They said he had been some kind of engineer before he retired, and that he had money saved up. His wife had died 2 years ago from cancer, and since then he lived alone in this quiet house with the white fence and the rose bushes his wife had planted. Linda hated herself for choosing him as a target, but desperation had a way of making people do things they never thought possible. She had never stolen anything in her life before this moment. She had been raised to work hard and be honest and treat people with respect. Her mother would have been so ashamed to see her standing here with a weapon in her pocket. But her mother was dead, and her husband was dead, and her children were hungry, and the world had stopped caring about whether she was a good person or not. The world only cared about money, and she had none of it left. She had sold her wedding ring and her television and every piece of jewelry she owned. She had sold Greg's tools and his fishing equipment and even the good winter coats the children had outgrown. There was nothing left to sell except her dignity, and apparently she was about to sell that too. Linda took 3 deep breaths and walked up the front steps. Her heart was beating so fast she thought she might pass out right there on his doorstep. She raised her hand and knocked on the door and immediately wanted to run away, but her feet stayed planted on the welcome mat and she waited. She could hear footsteps inside the house, and then the door opened and she was looking at Daniel Grant for the first time up close. He was older than she expected, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that made him look tired. He wore a simple blue sweater and reading glasses hung from a chain around his neck. He looked at her with mild surprise and maybe a little concern. Linda had practiced what she was going to say. She was going to demand money and threaten him with the knife if he refused. She was going to tell him not to call the police or she would hurt him. She was going to grab whatever cash or valuables she could find and run back to her children. But when Daniel Grant looked at her with those sad, kind eyes, she found that she could not speak at all. Her throat closed up and tears started running down her face, and suddenly she was sobbing right there on his doorstep. The knife felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in her pocket. Daniel did not step back or reach for his phone or yell for help. Instead, he looked at her with more concern, and his voice was gentle when he spoke. He asked if she needed help and told her she looked upset. Linda tried to stop crying, but she could not. She had been holding everything inside for so long, and now it was all coming out and she could not control it. She whispered that she was sorry, and that she did not know what else to do. She felt the knife slip from her pocket and heard it clatter onto the wooden porch floor. Daniel looked down at it and then back at her face, and still he did not look angry or afraid. He stepped aside and opened the door wider and told her to come inside and sit down. Linda knew this was wrong and that she should not go into his house, but her legs carried her forward anyway. The inside of the house was warm and clean, and there were photographs everywhere of a smiling woman with dark hair. Daniel led her to a couch in the living room and told her to wait while he got her something to drink. Linda sat down and put her face in her hands and cried harder than she had cried since the day Greg died. She heard Daniel in the kitchen, and then he came back with a cup of hot tea and a box of tissues. He sat down in a chair across from her and waited patiently for her to calm down enough to speak. When Linda finally stopped crying, she felt empty and exhausted. Daniel had not said anything or asked any questions. He had just sat there and let her cry, and somehow that kindness made everything worse because it reminded her of how alone she had been. She looked up at him and tried to explain, but the words came out broken and jumbled. She told him about her children and her dead husband and the eviction notice and the hunger and the fear. She told him she had come here to rob him and that she was a terrible person, and that she understood if he wanted to call the police. Daniel listened to every word, and his expression never changed from that same gentle concern. When she finished talking, he asked her just one question. He asked her what her children's names were, and Linda felt something break open in her chest because nobody had asked her about her children in such a long time. The next week moved so fast that Linda felt like she was watching it happen to someone else. Daniel called people from his church, and within 2 days, a group of volunteers showed up at the house next door with cleaning supplies and paint. They scrubbed every surface and fixed the leaky faucets and replaced the old curtains. Daniel took Linda shopping for basic furniture, and when she tried to refuse, he reminded her that this was his choice and his way of honoring Claire. He showed her a photograph of Claire teaching in her classroom and said his wife would have loved doing this. Linda picked out simple beds for the children, and a table for the kitchen and a couch for the living room. Daniel kept adding things to the cart when she was not looking. Extra blankets and pillows and dishes and pots and pans. He bought a desk for Katie so she could do homework, and art supplies for the twins and toys for Ethan. When they got to the checkout, Linda saw the total and felt sick, but Daniel just handed over his credit card like it was nothing. On the drive back to the house, he told her that money, sitting in a bank account, helped no one, but money spent on children who needed it honored his wife's memory. Moving day came, and Linda woke up thinking this must all be some kind of mistake. But Daniel showed up at their apartment with a borrowed truck and started loading their few belongings. Everything they owned fit in one load because they had so little left. Katie helped carry boxes and kept giving Daniel suspicious looks like she was waiting for him to reveal his true intentions. Marcus was excited about having his own room and kept asking Daniel questions about the house. The twins held hands and stayed quiet. Ethan clung to Linda and sucked his thumb, which he had not done in months. When they pulled up to the house next door to Daniel's place, Linda felt tears coming again. The volunteers had done so much work. The house looked fresh and clean and welcoming. Someone had planted flowers in the front yard, and there was a new welcome mat on the porch. Inside, everything smelled like cleaning products and fresh paint. The furniture was all set up, and there were groceries already stocked in the kitchen. Linda walked through each room and could not believe this was going to be their home. The children ran around exploring, and their voices echoed in the empty spaces. Katie pulled Linda aside in the kitchen and asked in a harsh whisper what the catch was. She said nobody did things like this without wanting something in return. Linda understood her daughter's suspicion because she had felt the same way. She told Katie that Daniel seemed genuine and that he just wanted to be part of their lives like a grandfather. Katie crossed her arms and said she already had a grandfather who never bothered to visit after their dad died, so why would this stranger be any different? Linda did not have a good answer except that they needed this help, and Daniel seemed kind. That first night in the new house was strange for everyone. The children were not used to having so much space. Marcus and Jake fought over who got which bedroom. Sophie cried because she missed their old apartment even though it had been falling apart. Katie locked herself in her room and would not come out for dinner. Ethan woke up screaming 3 times because he did not recognize where he was. Linda spent most of the night going from room to room comforting each child and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. The next morning, Daniel knocked on their door with a box of fresh donuts. Linda had barely slept and probably looked terrible, but Daniel did not seem to notice. He asked if everyone had settled in okay and if they needed anything. Linda admitted it had been a rough night. Daniel nodded and said that was normal and that change was hard even when it was good change. He gave her his phone number and told her to call any time, day or night, if they needed something. Then he went home, and Linda stood on her new porch watching him walk away and feeling confused by his constant kindness. The first few weeks were an adjustment period for everyone. Daniel kept his distance at first and seemed to understand they needed space to settle in. He would wave from his yard when he saw them outside. Sometimes he left things on their porch like fresh bread or a bag of oranges or tickets to the children's museum. There was never a note, just the gifts appearing like magic. Katie continued to be suspicious and told Linda they should not accept so many things. But Linda did not know how to refuse without seeming ungrateful. Marcus was the first one to really talk to Daniel. His bicycle had a flat tire, and he was trying to fix it in the driveway when Daniel came over and offered to help. Marcus hesitated, but he really wanted his bike working, so he said yes. Daniel got tools from his garage and showed Marcus how to patch the inner tube properly. While they worked, Daniel asked Marcus about school and what he liked to do for fun. Marcus found himself talking more than he had in months. Daniel listened to everything and did not treat him like a little kid. When the bike was fixed, Marcus thanked him shyly, and Daniel told him anytime he needed help with anything, he just had to ask. The twins were next to warm up to Daniel. Their school was having a spring concert, and Linda had to work late that night. Katie agreed to take her younger siblings, but she was not happy about it. When Daniel heard about the concert, he asked if he could come along. Katie wanted to say no, but the twins got excited at the idea of having someone else there to watch them. At the concert, Daniel sat with Katie and Ethan and clapped loudly when Sophie and Jake performed their song. Afterward, he took them all out for ice cream, and even Katie smiled a little bit when he made funny voices while reading the menu. Linda started noticing changes in her children. Marcus was getting into fewer fights at school, and his teacher sent home a note saying he seemed happier. The twins were laughing again and playing in the backyard for hours. Even Katie was slowly letting her guard down. She still did not talk to Daniel much, but Linda caught her watching him sometimes with a thoughtful expression. Ethan was the most transformed. He stopped having nightmares and started gaining weight. He followed Daniel around the yard asking endless questions, and Daniel never seemed annoyed by it. Linda herself was changing too. She had found a better job working at an office downtown. The pay was almost double what the grocery store had given her, and there were actual benefits including health insurance. For the first time in nearly 2 years, she felt like she could breathe. She could buy the children new clothes and shoes. She could pay for school supplies without having a panic attack. She could put a little bit of money into savings. She started sleeping through the night instead of lying awake doing impossible math. The constant knot of anxiety in her stomach began to loosen. 3 months passed, and Linda realized the trial period Daniel had mentioned was over. Neither of them had brought it up, and she wondered if he had forgotten about it. One evening, she walked over to his house and knocked on his door. Daniel answered, looking pleased to see her, and invited her in for coffee. They sat at his kitchen table, and Linda asked him directly if he wanted them to stay or if the trial period had shown him this was not working. Daniel looked surprised by the question and then laughed. He said he had completely forgotten about the trial period because it felt like they had always been neighbors. He said if she and the children were comfortable, then he hoped they would stay as long as they needed. Linda felt relief wash over her and realized how much she had been worrying about this conversation. She admitted that her children were doing better than they had in years. Katie's grades were improving, and she had joined the debate team at school. Marcus had made some new friends and stopped stealing food. The twins were back to their cheerful selves. Ethan called Daniel Mr. Danny and looked for him every morning. Daniel smiled and said he had noticed all those changes and that it made him happy to see them thriving. He said having them next door had given him purpose again, and he woke up each day looking forward to seeing them. They talked for over an hour that night about how things were going and what the future might look like. Daniel mentioned that he had been thinking about setting up education funds for all 5 children. Linda immediately protested and said he had already done too much. Daniel held up his hand and said this was not charity but investment. He said Katie was smart enough to go to college if someone helped with the costs. He said all the children deserved opportunities their circumstances had denied them. Linda did not know what to say. She had stopped dreaming about college for Katie months ago, when it became clear they would never afford it. Daniel also mentioned that Linda had talked about wanting to go back to school herself. He knew she had started taking a free online course in accounting at the community college. He said the house next door was hers for as long as she needed it, which meant she could focus on building a real career. Linda felt overwhelmed by his continued generosity. She asked him again why he was doing all this, and Daniel gave her the same answer he always did. He said Claire would have wanted this, and helping their family helped him feel connected to his wife's memory. As spring turned to summer, the relationship between the two households deepened. Daniel started joining them for dinner twice a week. Linda was not a great cook, but Daniel never complained and always complimented the meal. He taught Marcus how to grill hamburgers and the twins how to make homemade lemonade. Ethan sat on his lap during dinner and told him long rambling stories that made no sense. Katie slowly started asking Daniel for help with her homework, especially math, which had never been her strong subject. Daniel was patient and good at explaining things in ways that made sense. One Saturday, Daniel asked if he could take all the children to the lake for the day. Linda hesitated because she had never been apart from all 5 of them at once. But they were so excited about going that she agreed. Daniel loaded them into his van with life jackets and sunscreen and snacks. Linda spent the day cleaning the house and trying not to worry. When they came home that evening, all 5 children were sunburned and exhausted and talking over each other about what a great day they had. Marcus said Daniel had taught him how to skip stones. Sophie said they had seen a turtle. Jake said the hot dogs Daniel grilled were the best he ever had. Ethan fell asleep in the van and did not wake up even when Daniel carried him inside. Katie was the last one to come in, and she stopped to talk to Linda privately. She said she owed her mother an apology because Daniel really did seem to be a good person. She said she had been wrong to be so suspicious and that she understood now why Linda had trusted him. Linda hugged her daughter tight and felt something release in her chest. Katie's approval meant everything because Katie had been the most protective of their little family. That summer was the best one Linda could remember since before Greg died. The children played outside until dark. Daniel put up a basketball hoop in his driveway and Marcus spent hours practicing. The twins started a lemonade stand and Daniel was their best customer. Ethan learned to ride a tricycle on the sidewalk between the 2 houses. Katie got a part-time job at the library and started saving money for college. Linda finished her online course with high marks and enrolled in more classes for the fall semester. The neighbors on Maple Street had been watching this unusual arrangement with curiosity and some judgment. But gradually they saw how well it was working. They saw 5 children who had been quiet and withdrawn become loud and happy again. They saw Linda, who had looked exhausted and defeated, start to smile. They saw Daniel, who had been a ghost in his own house, come back to life. Some of the neighbors started saying how nice it was and what a good man Daniel must be. Others still whispered about how strange it was and wondered what Daniel was really getting out of it. Linda heard the whispers, but she did not care anymore. She knew the truth, which was that Daniel had saved her family when no one else would. She knew that his kindness was genuine even if other people could not understand it. She also knew that her children were giving Daniel something precious in return. They were giving him laughter and purpose and a reason to look forward to each day. It was not a one-sided arrangement, even though it had started that way. In late summer, Katie came home with information about college applications. Daniel sat with her at the kitchen table and helped her write her personal statement. He read through all her essays and gave her feedback. He drove her to visit campuses and ask good questions during the tours. When Katie got emotional about how much college was going to cost, Daniel reminded her about the education fund he had set up. Katie cried and hugged him and thanked him over and over. Daniel looked pleased and said that Claire had always believed every child deserved a chance at education. Marcus started talking about becoming an engineer like Daniel. He asked constant questions about what Daniel had done in his career and how things worked. Daniel loved having someone interested in his old profession. He started teaching Marcus basic concepts and showing him how to solve problems. Marcus soaked it all up and his science grades improved dramatically. His teacher called Linda to say whatever she was doing at home was working because Marcus had become one of her best students. The twins decided they wanted to be teachers like Miss Claire even, though they had never met her. Daniel showed them pictures of Claire in her classroom and told them stories about how much she loved teaching. Sophie and Jake started playing school with their stuffed animals and Ethan as their student. Daniel watched them sometimes with tears in his eyes. Linda knew he was thinking about how much Claire would have loved seeing this. As fall approached, Linda got a promotion at work. Her boss had been impressed with her dedication and her accounting coursework. The new position came with a significant raise and more responsibilities. Linda felt proud of herself for the first time in years. She was not just surviving anymore. She was actually building a life and a career. None of it would have been possible without Daniel's help. Summer arrived and brought changes for everyone. Katie got a full-time job at the library to save money for college expenses. She also started volunteering at a youth center, helping kids with homework. She told Linda that Daniel had inspired her to pay forward the help she had received. Marcus spent most of his time in Daniel's workshop learning woodworking and basic engineering concepts. He had decided he definitely wanted to be an engineer when he grew up, and Daniel encouraged this dream by teaching him everything he could. The twins joined a summer reading program at the library where Katie worked. They competed to see who could read more books, and both of them blew past their goals. Sophie decided she wanted to be a librarian when she grew up. Jake changed his mind every week about future careers. One week he wanted to be a chef, the next week a scientist, then a baseball player. Daniel told him he had plenty of time to figure it out, and that trying different interests was good. Ethan started swimming lessons at the community pool, and Daniel took him twice a week so Linda could work. In July, Daniel had a health scare that reminded everyone how precious their time together was. He collapsed in his yard while mowing the lawn. Marcus saw it happen and ran screaming for Linda. She called an ambulance while Marcus stayed with Daniel and held his hand. At the hospital, the doctors said Daniel had suffered a minor heart attack. He would need medication and lifestyle changes, but should recover fully. Linda sat by his hospital bed crying because she realized how much she had come to depend on him, not just for practical help, but for emotional support and companionship. The children were devastated when they heard Grandpa Danny was in the hospital. Katie blamed herself for not noticing he seemed tired lately. Marcus said he should have offered to mow the lawn instead of letting Daniel do it. The twins made get-well cards with pictures of Daniel surrounded by hearts. Ethan kept asking when Grandpa Danny was coming home. Linda realized that Daniel had become as essential to her children as she was. They loved him completely, and the thought of losing him terrified them. Daniel came home after 3 days with strict orders to rest and reduce stress. Linda immediately took over all the yard work and household tasks he usually did. The children visited him every day, bringing books and games to keep him entertained while he recovered. Daniel protested that he was fine, and they were making too much fuss, but Linda could see he was touched by their concern. He admitted that having people who cared whether he lived or died was a powerful motivation to take better care of himself. During his recovery, Daniel and Linda had many long conversations. He told her things about his marriage to Claire that he had never shared before. How they had met in college and known immediately they were meant for each other. How Claire's cancer diagnosis had shattered their retirement plans. How the last year of her life had been the hardest thing he had ever endured. He said he had felt guilty for being relieved when she finally passed because it meant her suffering was over. He said grief was complicated and messy, and not at all like people portrayed it in movies. Linda shared her own story of losing Greg. She admitted that their marriage had not been perfect. Greg had been a good man, but he had kept secrets about money and made choices she had not agreed with. She had loved him, but she had also been angry at him for dying and leaving her alone with 5 children. She said she had felt terrible guilt for being angry at someone who was dead. Daniel told her that anger was a normal part of grief, and that she should not feel guilty for having complicated feelings. These conversations brought them closer. Linda realized she had come to love Daniel not romantically but as family. He had become the father figure she had needed after her own parents passed away. He had become the grandfather her children deserved. He had become her best friend and the person she turned to when she needed advice or support. She told him all of this one evening, and Daniel got emotional. He said she and the children had become his family too, and that he could not imagine his life without them anymore. In August, Katie prepared to leave for college. The whole household was emotional about her departure. Katie had been the rock of the family for so long, and everyone relied on her. Linda worried about how the younger children would handle her absence. Marcus tried to act tough, but Linda caught him crying in his room one night. The twins made Katie promise to call them every week. Ethan did not fully understand that Katie was leaving and kept asking when she would be back from her trip. Daniel helped Katie pack and gave her advice about college life. He told her to take her studies seriously, but also to make time for friends and experiences. He said college was about more than just classes. He gave her a check to cover textbooks and expenses and refused to let her protest. He said this was an investment in her future, and she could pay it forward someday by helping another young person. Katie hugged him tight and thanked him for everything he had done for their family. On the day Katie left for college, everyone cried, including Daniel. They loaded her belongings into Daniel's van and drove her to campus 3 hours away. Katie's dorm room was small, but she was sharing it with a nice roommate who seemed friendly. They helped her unpack and set up her space. When it was time to say goodbye, Katie broke down and Linda held her while she cried. She told Katie how proud she was and how much she believed in her. Daniel told Katie that she was going to do great things and that he would always be there if she needed anything. The drive home was quiet and sad. The twins cried in the back seat. Marcus stared out the window looking miserable. Ethan asked again when Katie was coming home. Linda felt like a piece of her heart had been torn out. But she also felt incredibly proud. A year and a half ago, Katie had been trying to raise 4 siblings while Linda worked multiple jobs and they all went hungry. Now Katie was starting college with a bright future ahead of her. None of it would have been possible without Daniel. Life adjusted to Katie being gone. She called every few days and told them about her classes and new friends. She was doing well academically and socially. She came home for a weekend in September, and everyone was thrilled to see her. She looked happy and healthy and more confident. She told Daniel that she had joined a volunteer program at the college that tutored local kids. She said she kept thinking about how he had helped them and wanted to do the same for others. In October, Marcus turned 12 years old. Daniel threw him a birthday party and invited Marcus's friends from school. They played basketball and ate pizza and cake. Daniel gave Marcus a professional quality tool set for woodworking. Marcus was speechless with joy. He told Daniel it was the best present he had ever received. Linda watched them together and thought about how much Marcus had changed. He had gone from an angry kid getting into fights to a focused young man with goals and interests. Daniel had given him more than tools. He had given him mentorship and belief in his potential. The twins turned 9 and had separate parties because they wanted to celebrate their individual identities. Sophie had a party at the library with book-themed decorations. Jake had a party at the park with sports and games. Daniel attended both parties and gave each twin personal attention. He told them he was proud of how they were becoming their own people, while still being close siblings. He gave Sophie a collection of classic books and Jake a new baseball glove. Both twins hugged him and called him the best grandpa ever. 2 years after Linda had knocked on Daniel's door, everything had changed in ways she could never have imagined. She stood in her cap and gown at the State University graduation ceremony, having just received her bachelor's degree in accounting. Katie sat in the audience next to Daniel and the younger children, all cheering loudly, when Linda's name was called. She had continued taking classes while working full-time, and it had been exhausting but worth it. Her company had promoted her to senior accountant with a salary that still seemed unreal to her. After the ceremony, they all went out to celebrate at a nice restaurant. Daniel gave a toast saying how proud he was of Linda's accomplishments and how Claire would have loved to see this moment. He said Linda had shown her children that hard work and education could change your life. He said she was an inspiration to everyone who knew her. Linda cried happy tears and thanked Daniel for making all of this possible. She said without his help she would still be working at the grocery store and living in fear of eviction. Katie was finishing her 2nd year of college with excellent grades. She had declared a major in education and planned to become a teacher like Claire. Daniel was thrilled by this choice and told Katie that Claire would have been honored. Katie said Daniel and his stories about Claire had inspired her to pursue teaching. She wanted to make a difference in kids' lives the way Claire had, and the way Daniel had made a difference in their lives. She was already working part-time as a tutor and loved it. Marcus was in middle school and thriving. He had joined the robotics club, and his team had won several competitions. His grades were strong, especially in math and science. He still spent hours in Daniel's workshop, but now he was building complex projects on his own. Daniel said Marcus had real talent and a good mind for engineering. He was already talking to Marcus about college options and helping him understand what path he should take to achieve his goals. Marcus called Daniel his mentor and said he wanted to be just like him when he grew up. The twins were in 4th grade and completely different from the quiet, scared children they had been 2 years ago. Sophie was confident and loved reading above her grade level. She talked constantly about books and had started writing her own stories. Jake was athletic and social and made friends easily. He played 3 sports and was good at all of them. Both of them were happy, healthy kids with bright futures. They still called Daniel Grandpa Danny and spent time at his house almost every day. Ethan was 5 years old and starting kindergarten. He was excited about school and showed no anxiety about it. His preschool teachers had said he was well prepared academically and socially. He was a cheerful, talkative child who loved everyone. His favorite person was still Grandpa Danny, who he followed around asking endless questions. Daniel never seemed to tire of Ethan's company, and the two of them had a special bond. Linda sometimes watched them together and felt her heart swell with gratitude. In November, Linda received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from her former landlord at the terrible apartment they had lived in before moving next door to Daniel. The landlord had been arrested for housing code violations and fraud. Multiple tenants had filed complaints and the building had been condemned. The letter informed Linda that she was entitled to compensation for the substandard living conditions she had endured. The amount was not huge, but it was several $1,000s. Linda showed the letter to Daniel and said she wanted to use the money to pay him back for everything he had spent on them. Daniel absolutely refused. He said that money should go into savings for the children or for Linda's future. They had another argument about it, but Linda was stubborn. She said she needed to do this for her own peace of mind. Finally, they compromised again. Linda would put half the money into savings and use the other half to take everyone on a real vacation. Daniel agreed to this plan. In December, they all went to the beach for a week. It was the first real vacation any of the Morrison children had ever taken. They stayed in a rental house right on the ocean and spent days playing in the sand and swimming. Daniel taught the kids to fish off the pier and they cooked their catch for dinner. Katie came home from college to join them. They took pictures and made memories and laughed until their stomachs hurt. Linda looked at her family on the beach and thought about how far they had come. On Christmas Eve, 2 years after their first holiday together, the Morrison family and Daniel had dinner at Linda's house. It had become tradition for them to alternate hosting between the two houses. Linda cooked a ham and Daniel brought his famous sweet potatoes. The children exchanged gifts and Daniel gave each of them something thoughtful and personal. Katie got a first edition copy of a book she loved. Marcus got plans for an advanced woodworking project. The twins got personalized items related to their interests. Ethan got a toy workbench so he could build things like Grandpa Danny. After the younger children went to bed, Linda and Katie and Daniel sat by the Christmas tree talking. Katie mentioned that some of her college friends had commented on her unusual family situation. She said she had explained that Daniel was not related by blood, but was family in every way that mattered. She said her friends thought it was beautiful that a stranger had helped them when they needed it most. Daniel said he had stopped thinking of himself as a stranger about 2 years ago. He said they were his family now, plain and simple. Linda agreed and said she wanted to tell them both something she had been thinking about. She said that day 2 years ago when she had knocked on Daniel's door with a knife in her pocket had been the lowest point of her entire life. She had been ready to rob him and possibly hurt him if necessary because she saw no other way to feed her children. She said she had hated herself for what she was about to do, but desperation had overwhelmed everything else. Then Daniel had responded with kindness instead of fear or anger, and it had changed the trajectory of all their lives. Daniel listened, and then shared something he had never told them before. He said the day Linda knocked on his door, he had been thinking seriously about ending his life. He had been so depressed and lonely after losing Claire that he did not see the point in continuing. He had a plan, and had been building up the courage to go through with it. Then Linda appeared and gave him a reason to keep living. He said saving her family had saved him too. He said they had rescued each other in the most literal sense. Katie started crying and hugged Daniel tight. She said she could not imagine a world without him in it. Linda was crying too and told Daniel she had no idea he had been suffering so much. Daniel said grief could be invisible to outsiders, and that he had gotten good at pretending to be fine when he was falling apart inside. He said having a purpose again and people who needed him had pulled him back from the edge. He said every day with their family was a gift he had not expected to receive. They sat together in the glow of the Christmas tree and talked about the future. Katie would graduate in 2 more years and hopefully get a teaching job. Marcus would go to high school and then college with Daniel's help. The twins had years of growing ahead of them. Ethan was just beginning his education. Linda planned to continue advancing in her career, and maybe someday buy her own house, though Daniel kept saying they could stay next door as long as they wanted. Daniel said he looked forward to being part of all of it and watching the children grow into adults. In early spring, Linda was contacted by a local newspaper reporter who had heard about their story from someone at the community college. The reporter wanted to write an article about how Daniel had helped a struggling family. Linda was hesitant because she did not want their private life exposed. But Daniel said maybe their story could inspire others to help people in need. They agreed to the interview but kept the details of their first meeting private. That secret was just for them. The article ran in April with a headline about family and community and kindness. It featured photos of Daniel with all the Morrison children and quotes from Linda about how one person's generosity had changed multiple lives. The response was overwhelming. People from all over reached out saying they were inspired by the story. Some people sent donations asking that they be used to help other families in need. Linda and Daniel decided to work with their church to create a fund that would help single parents who were struggling. The Claire Morrison Memorial Fund was established in honor of both Claire and Greg. It would provide emergency assistance to families facing eviction or extreme hardship. Daniel donated a significant amount to get it started, and Linda contributed what she could. Katie helped organize fundraising events from her college. Within a few months, the fund had helped 3 families avoid homelessness. Daniel said Claire would have loved knowing her name was attached to something that helped children and families. Linda said Greg would have been proud too. In May, on the 3rd anniversary of the day Linda had knocked on Daniel's door, they had a quiet dinner together, just Linda and Daniel, while the children were at various activities. Linda said she wanted to thank him again for everything, but Daniel stopped her. He said they needed to stop thinking of their relationship as one-sided. He said yes, he had provided housing and money, but she and her children had given him just as much in return. The new year brought unexpected challenges that tested their unconventional family. In January, Linda got a call from Katie's school saying she needed to come in for a meeting. Katie had been caught helping another student cheat on a test. Linda was shocked because Katie had never been in trouble before. At the meeting, the principal explained that Katie had given her answers to a friend who was struggling. Katie admitted it right away and said she was just trying to help someone who reminded her of how hard things used to be for their family. Linda did not know what to do. She understood Katie's impulse to help, but cheating was serious. That evening, she talked to Daniel about it, and he suggested they speak to Katie together. They sat down with Katie and explained that helping people was good, but not when it meant breaking rules or compromising her own integrity. Daniel told Katie about a time early in his career when he had cut corners on a project to help a coworker, and how it had nearly cost him his job. He said he learned that real help meant teaching people how to do things the right way, not enabling shortcuts. Katie cried and said she understood. She accepted her punishment from school, which was detention and a 0 on the test. More importantly, she went to her friend and explained that she had done her a disservice by making cheating seem acceptable. Linda was proud of how Katie handled it, even though the situation had been difficult. Daniel told Katie that making mistakes was part of growing up, and what mattered was learning from them. The incident brought them closer as Katie realized she could turn to both Linda and Daniel for guidance. February brought financial stress when Linda's car broke down. The repair estimate was more than she had in savings. She felt that old panic returning as she calculated how she would get to work without a car. Public transportation would add 2 hours to her commute each way. She could not ask Daniel for more help after everything he had already done. But when Daniel noticed she seemed stressed and asked what was wrong, she broke down and told him about the car. Daniel offered to lend her the money for repairs. Linda refused because she did not want to be in debt to him. They had a rare argument about it, with Linda insisting she would find another way, and Daniel pointing out that she was being stubborn and prideful. Finally, they compromised. Daniel would lend her the money at no interest and she would pay him back $20 each week until the debt was settled. It would take over a year, but Linda felt better having a concrete plan to repay him. Daniel agreed, even though he thought it was unnecessary. The car situation made Linda realize how precarious their stability still was. One unexpected expense could throw everything into chaos again. She decided to be even more careful with money and started taking on extra hours at work when they were available. Daniel noticed she was exhausted and gently suggested that maybe she was pushing too hard. Linda admitted she was terrified of ending up back where they had started. Daniel reminded her that she was not alone anymore, and that asking for help was not weakness. In March, Marcus got into another fight at school. Linda was disappointed because he had been doing so well. When she asked him what happened, Marcus said a kid had made fun of them for living next door to Daniel and taking charity from an old man. Marcus had punched the kid and gotten suspended for 3 days. Linda was angry at first, but then she saw how much the comment had hurt Marcus. He felt ashamed of needing help even though their situation had improved so much. Daniel came over that evening to talk to Marcus. He took him out to the garage workshop and they worked on a woodworking project together while they talked. Daniel explained that there was no shame in accepting help when you needed it. He said every successful person he had ever known had received help at some point. He told Marcus about how his own father had died when Daniel was young, and how his uncle had stepped in to pay for his college education. Without that help, Daniel never would have become an engineer or had the life he built with Claire. Marcus listened and asked if Daniel had paid his uncle back. Daniel said yes in a way. He had helped his uncle's children with their college expenses years later. He said help was not always a direct transaction. Sometimes you received help from one person and paid it forward by helping someone else. He told Marcus that someday when Marcus was grown and successful, he could help someone else who needed it. That was how the cycle worked. Marcus seemed to understand and apologized for the fight. He served his suspension without complaint and wrote an apology letter to the other student. Spring brought better developments. Katie received her college acceptance letters and got into her top choice school with a partial scholarship. The education fund Daniel had set up would cover the rest. Katie cried happy tears for the first time Linda could remember. She hugged both Linda and Daniel and said she could not believe she was actually going to college. Linda felt overwhelming pride in her daughter who had been through so much but kept working hard. The twins finished 3rd grade at the top of their class. Their teachers raved about how well they were doing and what a turnaround they had made from the previous year. Sophie and Jake brought home report cards full of high marks and proud teacher comments. Daniel took them out for ice cream to celebrate and listened to them chatter about everything they had learned. He told them that Claire would have been so proud of them because she loved students who worked hard. Ethan turned 4 years old and was thriving in preschool. His teacher said he was social and creative and showed no signs of the developmental delays she had worried about when he first started. Linda remembered how quiet and withdrawn Ethan had been a year ago. Now he was a normal, happy preschooler. He talked constantly and asked a million questions and had opinions about everything. His favorite person besides Linda was Grandpa Danny, who had endless patience for his stories and games. In late spring, Linda completed her associate degree in accounting. She walked across the stage at the community college graduation ceremony with her children, and Daniel cheering loudly in the audience. It was one of the proudest moments of her life. She had not thought she would ever go to college, and here she was graduating with honors. Her employer had already promised her another promotion once she had the degree. Daniel took everyone out to a nice restaurant to celebrate and gave Linda a card with a quote from Claire about the importance of education. That night after the children were in bed, Linda sat on her porch looking at the stars. Daniel came over and sat beside her without saying anything for a while. Finally, Linda spoke. She said she had been thinking about that day a year ago, when she had shown up at his door with a knife in her pocket. She said she still could not believe how drastically her life had changed. Daniel said he had been thinking about that day too. He said it was the day both their lives had been saved. Linda asked him what he meant because she understood how he had saved her, but not the other way around. Daniel explained that after Claire died, he had been going through the motions of living, but not really alive. He had thought about selling both houses and moving somewhere else to escape the memories. He had been so lonely that some days he did not speak to another person at all. He had wondered what the point of going on was when the person he loved most was gone. Then Linda had appeared on his doorstep and given him a purpose again. He said the last year had reminded him that life was still worth living, that there was still joy to be found and love to be given, that Claire's memory could be honored through action, not just grief. He said Linda and her children had taught him that family was not just about blood or marriage. It was about choosing to care for each other and showing up every day. He said he went to bed every night grateful that Linda had knocked on his door, even if her original intentions had been different. The first real test of their relationship came in October when Sophie broke her arm. She had been climbing the old oak tree in the backyard even though Linda had told the twins 100 times to be careful. Sophie fell from a high branch and landed badly. Jake ran screaming for help while Sophie lay on the ground crying. Daniel heard the commotion and came running faster than Linda had ever seen him move. He assessed the situation calmly and told Jake to get Linda, while he stayed with Sophie. Linda was at work when Jake called her cell phone sobbing. She told her boss she had an emergency and ran for her car. But Daniel did not wait. He carefully lifted Sophie and put her in his van. He called Linda on the drive to tell her he was taking Sophie to the emergency room, and she should meet them there. Linda felt panic rising in her chest, but also gratitude that Daniel had been there to help. By the time she got to the hospital, Daniel had already checked Sophie in and was sitting with her in the waiting area. Sophie was still crying, but she had calmed down with Daniel holding her good hand. The doctor said Sophie had a clean break and would need a cast for 6 weeks. Linda felt sick when she thought about the hospital bill, but she had insurance now thanks to her new job. While they waited for the cast, Daniel told Sophie funny stories and made her laugh despite the pain. He bought her a candy bar from the vending machine and let her pick what color cast she wanted. When they finally left the hospital hours later, Sophie was wearing a bright purple cast and was in much better spirits. She held Daniel's hand the whole way to the van. That night, after all the children were in bed, Linda went over to thank Daniel properly. She tried to explain how grateful she was that he had been there and how she did not know what she would have done without him. Daniel shook his head and said that was what family did. They took care of each other. Linda realized he was right. Somewhere along the way, they had stopped being a charity case and a generous donor. They had become family. The realization made her cry, and Daniel hugged her and said everything was going to be okay. Halloween came and Daniel went all out decorating both houses. He bought carved pumpkins and fake cobwebs and a skeleton that lit up. He bought candy by the huge bags and helped the children plan their costumes. Marcus wanted to be a zombie. The twins wanted to be matching vampires. Ethan wanted to be a dinosaur. Katie said she was too old for trick-or-treating, but Daniel convinced her to dress up and take her siblings around the neighborhood. He gave her a witch hat and a plastic broomstick, and she actually laughed. On Halloween night, Daniel sat on his porch handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. When the Morrison children came back with their bags full of candy, they dumped it all on his living room floor and sorted through it together. Daniel helped Ethan trade the candy he did not like for better options. They stayed up late eating chocolate and watching a silly Halloween movie. Linda sat on the couch with Ethan asleep in her lap and felt a contentment she had not experienced in years. November brought Katie's 17th birthday. Linda wanted to do something special, but money was still tight despite her better job. Daniel offered to host a birthday party at his house, and Linda gratefully accepted. Daniel bought decorations and a cake from the good bakery downtown. He invited Katie's friends from school and the debate team. He set up games and music and made sure there was plenty of food. Katie had not had a real birthday party since before her father died. When she blew out the candles, she looked happier than Linda had seen her in a long time. After the party, when everyone had gone home, Katie asked to talk to Daniel alone. Linda watched through the window as Katie spoke seriously and Daniel listened. Later, Katie told her mother that she had thanked Daniel for everything and told him she was sorry for being so cold to him at first. She said Daniel had told her that her suspicion had been smart and that he respected her for protecting her family. Katie said she had asked if she could call him Grandpa Danny like Ethan did. Daniel had apparently gotten very emotional and said he would be honored. Thanksgiving was the next big milestone. Linda insisted on hosting since Daniel had done so much for them. She spent days planning the menu and cleaning the house. Katie helped her cook and the twins made paper decorations. Marcus set the table using the good dishes Daniel had bought them months ago. Ethan made a card for Grandpa Danny with lots of scribbles that were supposed to be a turkey. When Daniel arrived, he brought flowers and wine and more food than they could possibly eat. The dinner itself was chaotic and loud, with all 6 of them crowded around the table. Ethan spilled his juice twice. The twins argued about who got more mashed potatoes. Marcus ate 3 helpings of everything. Katie actually laughed at Daniel's jokes. Linda looked around the table and felt tears threatening again. A year ago, she had been standing on Daniel's porch with a knife in her pocket ready to rob him. Now they were sharing Thanksgiving dinner like a real family. After dinner, Daniel asked if he could say something. He stood up and raised his glass. He said he wanted to thank Linda and her children for giving him the greatest gift he could have asked for. He said the past 9 months had been the happiest he had been since losing Claire. He said coming home to an empty house every day had been slowly killing him, but now he came home to noise and laughter and life. He said he finally understood what Claire had meant when she made him promise to help young people. It was not just about giving money or resources. It was about connection and love and family. Linda stood up too and said she needed to thank Daniel for saving them. She said she had been at the absolute lowest point of her life when she knocked on his door. She said she had been ready to become someone she was not because she saw no other choice. Daniel had given her back her dignity and her hope. He had given her children safety and stability and a future. She said she would never be able to repay him, but she would spend the rest of her life being grateful. Daniel waved away her thanks and said she had already repaid him 1,000 times over. He said every smile from Ethan and every good grade from Marcus and every achievement from Katie was payment enough. He said watching the twins play in the yard and seeing Linda accomplish her goals made him feel useful again. He said they had rescued each other, and that was the truth of it. December came with cold weather and talk of Christmas. Linda worried about how to afford presents for 5 children, but Daniel had already thought of that too. He asked Linda to make a list of what each child wanted and needed. She tried to keep it modest, but Daniel bought everything on the list and more. He set up a Christmas tree in his living room and invited the children over to decorate it. He played Christmas music and made hot chocolate and told stories about holidays he had spent with Claire. On Christmas Eve, Daniel hosted dinner at his house. Linda brought a ham she had saved up to buy and homemade rolls. The children were buzzing with excitement about Santa coming. After dinner, they all sat in the living room and Daniel read them The Night Before Christmas. Even Katie and Marcus, who were too old to believe in Santa anymore, sat quietly and listened. Ethan fell asleep against Daniel's shoulder before the story was done. Linda looked at this scene and thought about how different things were from last Christmas when they had been cold and hungry and hopeless.